So in this video, we're going to be looking at bubble sorts. The bubble sort is a sort that will loop through an array, and effectively it will loop through an array twice, focusing on each element within the array, comparing it to the one above it, and if it turns out that that element is smaller than it, it will swap them over so that eventually the biggest will, as they say, bubble to the top and the smallest will move down. So to start with, we're going to need to declare some variables to keep track of where we are in the array. We're going to need to declare a variable to be a temporary holder when we're swapping array items over. And we're also going to need to keep a boolean going as to whether or not we've made a swap. If we do a whole run through where we don't make a swap, that means everything's already in order, and therefore we can exit our loop. So that's the first one I'm going to declare. Boolean swapped equals, and I'm just going to set it to true for now. And I'm going to have a counter, so I'm going to say int counter. I'm going to start that counter off at 1 because we'll start on the first pass through. And then I'm going to have int temp. So this is going to be a variable that I use later on when I'm swapping array values around, and I'll talk more about it at the time. At the moment, I'm not going to declare it to anything. I'm just going to, so I'm not going to assign it to anything. I'm just going to declare that there's that variable. And then I'm going to declare my array. So let's call it search array. I'm going to use the quick method of creating the array, which is with curly brackets. And I'm just going to stick in some random numbers. And in fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Brilliant. So that's all the setup done. What I want my program to do is, before it starts all the looping, I want it to print the array out so that I can see a before and after effectively. So I'm going to do system dot out dot print, and the way I'm going to print this array is I'm going to use a built-in function, which is arrays dot toString, and then inside these brackets I'm going to pass it the array I want it to print. So I want to print search array. Initially you'll probably get a red line come up underneath arrays, so you'll need to fix imports, and it'll import the java.util.arrays up at the top here. Okay, so if I was just to run this code now, all it would do is successfully print out my array in the order that I declared it. So let's start with our looping. So I'm going to say while my counter is less than or equal to my search array dot length, and I'm going to set it to the search array dot length minus 1. The reason for this is because later on I'm going to be looking for the next element along within my loop. If I tried to do that when I was at the very end, I would look out of bounds. So therefore, the only element I ever actually want to go up to is here, because then when I compare it to the next one along, I am actually, in fact, comparing it to the last element. So I'm going to say minus 1, and so I want to loop while the counter is less than the length of the array minus 1, and swapped equals true. So I can say just swapped because it's a boolean. So the first thing I want to do is set swapped to false. So in my next statement, if I don't manage to swap will state false. It will mean everything's in order and I won't need to continue doing this loop. So I've done my first loop, and this loop is going to basically go along each element of my array. What I now need to do is create a loop that will, for that element, keep moving it through so that I can keep checking. So for this, I'm going to use a for loop. I'm going to say for int I equals 0. Well, I is less than search array dot length minus 1. I plus plus. So there's my for loop set up correctly, with me initializing a counter, comparing the counter against some number, and then incrementing the counter. And all I'm going to do inside this for loop is say if search array I is greater than search array I plus 1. So what this is going to do is, so we'll imagine this is the first run through. It's going to compare search array I. So on the first run through, I is equal to 0, so it's going to do this element here. Let's compare it to search array I plus 1. So 0 plus 1 is 1. So it's going to compare element 0 to element 1. It's going to check if they're bigger or not. If they were, so let's write this. If we were, we need to swap the values around. So in order to do this, this is where we make use of temp. So we're going to get temp to hold the value of search array I for us, and then we will make search array I equal the value of search array I plus 1. So now at this point, temp would equal 13, and we would make search array element 0 equal 55. We now need to make this element equal 13, so search array I plus 1 equals temp. And we need to say that we swapped values. And that's it. So this code will keep looping through. The outside counter, making sure that every individual element gets looked at. And the inside counter, ensuring, so the inside for loop, ensuring that the swapping happens at each place. One thing we do need to do though, after the for loop is, otherwise we'll get stuck in an infinite loop, increment the counter. And then just so that I know whether or not it's worked, I'm going to print the array out again at the end of my while loop. So let's run. Brilliant, look at that. So we had our initial array, and then our final array is sorted in numeric order. What's quite fun is if you place a printout of the array at different points. So I could do a printout here every time it did a swap, and you'll see that this is how many swaps it had to do, and you can see the elements being moved up in every swap, and the patterns that it starts to form. Okay, your go.